Hey guys, it's Lauren Yates from Rave It Up here, and today we're going to be chatting over Zoom with American actor Michael McMillian. You might remember him playing Steve from True Blood. He was also in Hot in Cleveland, My Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, and Beauty and the Briefcase with Hilary Duff. We talked to him about all of those projects today, as well as his two podcast series. He does one called the Bigfoot Collectors Club with Bryce Johnson, who is from Pretty Little Liars and was on our show back in 2018, as well as his own podcast he just started about a month ago called Slate Your Name. There's so much to cover today, so let's get into it now. Before we get into today's interview, we would like to give a shout out to our Patreons, Irene, Bev, and Michael. If you haven't heard of Patreon before, it is a great way to support us and keep us running and improving. You pick a membership tier that suits you and your budget per month, and in return for supporting us, we'll give you behind-the-scenes content and free stuff. You don't have to give much either. You can be a part of our Patreons for as little as $4 a month. Just visit patreon.com/raveitup. You can even donate through PayPal if you don't trust other sites. You can do so just through our email, raveituptv@gmail.com. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact us. We appreciate anything you can do to support us. Now, let's get into this interview. Michael, welcome to Rave It Up. It is a pleasure to finally have you on the show. How are you going today?
I'm going really well today. Thanks. Is that how you ask in Australia? Say how you going today?
Yeah.
How you going?
I say good day, mate. Well. Would that be more Aussie?
Oh, please. Yes. Well, I mean, I don't know. It's up to you. I'm the American in this situation, and so however you want to address it is great with me.
I feel like it would really freak a lot of Americans out if I started off like that. Like, g'day, mate. And it's like, what, huh?
Like, so it is this way down there. Okay, got it. So every stereotype I've ever seen about Australia
completely, but yeah, I think it depends where you live in Australia as well. But as you already know, your lovely podcast co-host, Bryce Johnson, has been on the show as well. And for our audience, that was back in April of 2018. Like, he needs to come back on already.
The before times. That was the different times we were living in.
Yes. Well, it's great to finally have you on too, because we did speak about you in our interview, which I'm sure you said you watched it. So I'm sure you probably
I did. I listened just to see if he mentioned my name, and he did. So
if he badmouthed
we can continue to work together. Yeah.
Well, since this is your first time on the show, we'd love to actually start from the beginning of your career, if that's okay, to get a good idea of how you made it to where you are today. So I did my research on you before you came on. I really dived deep. I read that you grew up in Kansas and moved to Michigan to attend an arts academy there. How was that move? Correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't live in the States, and I've really only been to like LA and also Orlando, like Florida and everything.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Is Kansas, like, that's quite hot over there, and Michigan is quite cold, right?
Actually, they're similar than you might think. So Michigan is colder and it gets more snow. Kansas is dead center in the United States. So we kind of get the worst of all weather and a little bit of the best of the good weather. You know what I mean? So our fall lasts maybe 2 weeks. Our spring is about 2 weeks. And then it's usually really hot and humid in the summertime, and then really cold and chilly and kind of rainy and icy during the winter. And every now and then we might get a beautiful snowfall, but it tends to melt pretty quickly, or it comes in the form of a blizzard. But so Michigan's further north. It's still Midwestern. So it's like east of Kansas. And I couldn't have been more excited to go. I went to Interlochen Arts Academy to finish high school, which is, here, I'm sure you have an international audience, but I have a friend who's from England who, when I talk about high school, he'll be like, I don't know what you're talking about. So I was there I went there at like 16 to 18. Yep. And then I actually did it with a postgraduate year at this school. So I kind of took a weird gap year in between Interlochen and college, where I basically stayed at Interlochen and then had this like really wonderful artistically free year where I kind of got to do whatever I wanted to do, write short plays, direct some theater, co-direct some of the main stage productions there. But Interlochen is this really cool place out in the middle of the woods in northern Michigan. It started as a music camp back in the like 1920s, and then started to add dance and performing arts and then visual arts, and then it became an academy in the 60s. And it was small. It's still pretty small. It's grown since I've been there, but I think there were about 420 students when I was there, and we're like living in dorms in the middle of the woods, in between two lakes, interlocking. And I basically just went there and studied classical theater with a bunch of theater nerds for 3 years, basically.
And it was the start of everything. Did you move by yourself too, or did you move to Michigan because of your family?
No, so it was like a boarding school. So it was like going to college early or a university, so it was, my parents were back in the Midwest, and I came home for the summers and during holiday and stuff like that, and spring break. But basically, I basically just moved out of the house a little bit earlier at like 16 instead of 18 or 19.
They sent you off.
They sent me off. Yeah, and it was just because I actually had like it's been funny, like looking back on it now in my early 40s, but I think like most kids, I definitely struggled with like a bit of anxiety and depression my early years of high school, especially my second year of high school. So when I was like 15, turning 16, and the thing that made me happy was doing theater. And I knew I wanted to act. But at the time, this is the early mid 90s. So like YouTube doesn't exist. Smartphones don't exist. The only way you could really act is if your school was doing a play, or if you were lucky enough, like I was, to have a couple extracurricular programs. There were a couple in where I grew up. The Music Theater for Young People was one of them, and the Blue Valley Recreation Commission, the Blue Valley Youth Players, was one of them. And it was sort of like I would leave school and go to a different school where all these kids from my district or my town were getting together to put on like Oklahoma or Bye Bye Birdie, Roger, we're all like the real classics of American musical theater. And that was sort of the only outlet I had. So I liked to sing, wasn't very good at dancing, but had to learn a little bit how to dance. So it kind of like, that's where I found my people, and I really was happy there. And it just came to a point where I was like, I know I want to act. I know this is what I want to do. I'm not having a good time at the high school I was at. So I had talked to my parents about it, and they agreed to let me apply for Interlock. And I'd known a friend of mine who'd done the summer program, and I was sort of planning to do the summer camp. And then it just dawned on us, like, why not apply to the school? And, I was lucky enough and privileged enough that I got to go, with the help of a scholarship, but I got to go. And it really set me on the path that I'm currently still on. It's wild.
So it sounds like you were always really driven. Like that was always the plan A. There was never any plan B. There was no other careers that you wanted to pursue.
Well, there were things that I enjoyed, and I've worked some of that other stuff into my career. Like my other two, I love to draw and I love to write. The thing I did really enjoy at the high school I was at, before Interlocking, was I was on the school newspaper.
Oh, cool.
And I loved it. And so I really kind of learned how to write from a journalistic standpoint. There had an awesome teacher, Mr. McCrossan, who was great. And I also was the cartoonist for the paper. So I was writing comics and writing articles for that. And I loved it. And I learned like layout and graphic design. I was doing I would go out and sell advertisements, and then, like for local businesses. And then I would design the ads and did a lot of those competitions, like won a few like cartooning competitions and ad design stuff. And I really did love that. And there was a part of me that thought, well, I might go into journalism because I do enjoy this, or I might become a comic book artist because I was a big comic book guy. And I sort of went, no, this is really where this is kind of my happiness, though, is really, I think the thing that separated it was how social theater was,
Yes.
you know, and that it was so collaborative, and not that journalism isn't, it absolutely is. But I liked being around other people, and I liked all of that, you know, like the social aspect that came with theater. But all that other stuff never truly left either. You know, I still write. I've written some comic books in my career, and I can apply that artistic sensibility to scripting comics. And you know, I'm still like using basic layout things that I learned in newspaper when I'm like putting together graphics for Bigfoot Collectors Club or my new podcast, Slate Your Name, on Instagram and stuff like that. So it's weird how all of those things kind of come back to you, even if that's not the career that you're pursuing.
Plus, it's kind of all under the same umbrella too. Like, you're writing, you can write, you know, for screen and things like that. And I'm going to bring up the comic books a little later on too, because I've got some cool questions about that.
Cool, yeah.
And you also graduated from Carnegie Mellon as well, School of Drama. That is such a prestigious school, something, you know, a place that everybody knows about. Was that, you know, high? Did they have high expectations for that? You know, was that a bit nerve-wracking for you?
It was, you know, it's funny. So part of the way I ended up doing like this postgraduate year at Interlochen was my senior year. So when I was 18, the year that we were all auditioning for colleges, I was so in the moment and really wrapped up with the work that we were doing at Interlochen that it's not that I didn't take the college application process super seriously, but looking back, it wasn't as much of a priority as I should have made it. And I felt like, I'm going to get in somewhere. I took it for granted. I got a little cocky, you know, and I applied to 4 schools that year: Juilliard, USC, which I really wanted to go to. At the time, I was kicking around the idea of going to school for filmmaking, for being a director as well. And so I applied to the USC Film School and the theater program. And basically, and then I can't remember what the third one was. And then, maybe NCSA, I'm not sure. And then SUNY Purchase, which I did on a whim. I was at the auditions with a friend, and so I ended up getting into SUNY Purchase, which was my bottom pick. No offense, SUNY Purchase. That's in New York. But I kind of had a freak out, honestly. Like, I remember the day that I remember it was like a summer afternoon, and I'd been waiting tables that summer and teaching children's theater, and the packet, like the welcome packet, came for SUNY Purchase. And it was like, all right, this is like when, you know, tuition time is happening. This is like, pick a dorm, pick where you want to live. And I just remember getting that packet in the mail and being like, I don't want to go here. This isn't what I want to do, you know? And that was a difficult conversation to have with my parents. But ultimately we decided, look, let me go back to Interlochen. I know what that will be like. If I went to Purchase, I would be reapplying for a BFA program anyway, and probably starting over. I'm not saying I'm not giving advice to anybody to do this, but I ended up, it was just my story. You know what I mean? And everybody's is different. And I ended up going back to Interlochen and then making college a priority that year, you know? So instead of having 4 monologues in my back pocket, I had like 10, you know, and I took an independent study with my instructor, David Monti, and we just made it a point to be like, let's get you good and ready for these college auditions. And I think I really needed to get in that mind frame. And I had not been in that my senior year of high school. And also, which I didn't realize at the time, I was also sick with mononucleosis at the time. So when I was doing all my college auditions, and I think my energy was just bad, and I didn't realize, I just thought I was really tired. And then it was like a week later, my entire face swelled up and I was sick for a month.
Wow.
But yeah, so that was the year that I went, because I had friends who went. I applied to Carnegie, and I hadn't applied to Carnegie the year before. And I think it was just timing wise, it was right. It kind of happened. You know, in some ways, I think I'm a little bit of a late bloomer And so it just kind of happened the way it needed to, I guess. And then once I was there, it all felt good. I felt like I was in rhythm, and I was like, yes, this is where I'm supposed to go to school. This feels right.
Gotta go with that gut feeling.
Yeah. It's hard. I think especially when, I was a kid who felt like, oh, I'm good at this. I'm good at acting. Even at Interlochen, I was getting like lead roles really early on, and not every time, but it's hard when a setback comes along where you're like, wait a minute, I didn't get into the colleges I wanted to get into. Like, this doesn't usually happen. Yeah, how could they not? So I think like I'm glad I had that moment at a young age, because once you get out to LA, that rejection is coming on almost daily basis, So it was good for me to have a little bit of a setback and a little bit of a, this isn't what I planned. How can I turn this into something that's productive? And again, I was lucky that my family was able to send me there for an extra year, my poor father and mother, but yeah, yeah, shout out to mom and dad. So so that, I don't know, I've lost my train of thought, I think.
That's okay, I'll continue on. And is it true that you got signed by an agent like after a senior class showcase? Do you really think it's about being at the right place at the right time, and obviously having some preparation in there too?
Well, that's another thing that I think that year, that post-grad year at Interlochen taught me, which was like, do not take these auditions for granted. So at the end of Carnegie Mellon, you spend the last basically like 6 months of school studying the business. And at the time it was like, you're going to go to New York or you're going to go to LA. Atlanta wasn't a real big scene. Chicago definitely was like an option. And I had assumed, like most of my friends, I would go to New York and start pursuing theater stuff first, and then eventually make my way to Los Angeles. But I always wanted to go to LA, even before Interlochen. I was like, LA, I didn't really have, I'd love to do a Broadway play. I love live theater, but I was always thinking film and television. And so at the end of the senior year, you put on a showcase for industry reps and casting directors. And there was this thing that happened where I very quickly was like, okay, I'm not, because sometimes at Carnegie, they kind of want to show off the prestige of classical theater. And they're like, you should do a Shakespeare piece, or you should do this, something from Pygmalion. And I'm like, I'm not doing any of that. I'm going to write my own stuff. I co-wrote a sketch with a friend, and then I adapted a monologue from a book that I really liked that was popular at the time, A Heartbreaking Work of Staggering Genius by Dave Eggers. And there's a chapter in there where he's talking about auditioning for and pitching himself in the first person as a cast member on The Real World, one of the early seasons in San Francisco. And so I took that piece from that book and adapted and modified it. So when I came out for my monologue at the showcase, I was speaking directly to casting agents and talent agents, and being like, look, I'm the guy from the Midwest. I can do this. I can play this, blah, 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 blah. And I would literally hand out my headshots. And it was a bit that really worked. And I think it was sort of a thing that, like, it got laughs and it got me a ton of meetings. And out of that process, I ended up getting an agent, and I'm still with the same agency. And I got, they've started sending me out for TV guest stars right away. And I suddenly went, well, why would I go to New York and I had opportunities in New York as well, but I was like, I could go to New York where the rent is more expensive. This is in 2002. Things have changed here in LA. But I was like, I could go to New York and then like get a job bartending or waiting tables, and then maybe get an off-Broadway play that won't pay any bills. Or I could go to LA where I've already got auditions lined up for me, get one of these guest stars, and be able to pay my rent for 2 months. You know what I mean? So it's like, this seems more seems like there's a little bit more momentum over here. Let me go to LA and try it out. And so that's what happened.
And you've stayed.
And I stayed. Yeah. And started working in TV. Really, I got lucky. I booked like 3 guest stars in the first month I was out here, and that really started the momentum going for me out here.
Well, you've definitely been in a lot of popular shows too. Like when you look at your IMDb page, I'm like, wow, NCIS, CSI, Shameless, Hawaii Five-O, Hot in Cleveland, The Mentalist, Scrubs, Firefly, guys, going back in time there. 8 Simple Rules, I love that show too.
Firefly was my very first job. I had one line in Firefly, and shooting before Zoom, it was a thing where I was a character that was being brought up on a video screen directly. I mean, doing what we're doing now, playing, I think my character's name was Young Hopeful. He was like a John, hoping that the space courtesan would pick him as her client. And that was like one line, shot it on the Fox lot. Joss Whedon was directing it. And I was just like, oh, this is so strange. I've been out here for 2 weeks and I'm suddenly on Firefly, an actual like movie lot. Yeah. And Firefly hadn't even aired yet. You know what I mean? So it was before it aired, and I was just like, I don't even know what this is.
Boom.
Yeah, exactly. So it was that was really cool. That was the very first job I did out here.
So do you prefer having a lot of cameos under your belt? Do you find that actually helps you get other roles?
It can work begets work. There's definitely been times when I've like worked on a show. I'm trying to think of a specific example. Well, actually Firefly was one, right? So I, not too long after that, auditioned for a larger role, a guest star in Angel, and actually got the offer, I think because they all remembered me from, they're like, oh, it's a guy from Firefly. And then someone came along, I think it might've been the network, and things were different back then, but they were like, no, we can't, he was just in Firefly. We can't have him in another Whedon show right away, which doesn't make sense today. But for whatever reason, that got shot down, and I ended up not doing that guest star. But it's definitely like, you work with people, they remember you, you do an okay job, you'll do other stuff with them down the line.
And it looks like, on your resume that you've just done freaking everything.
yeah. And as far as like the size of the role, like a cameo thing, for me, that just, getting one line on Firefly on a network show was huge. It was a co-star. And so you're like, all right, I want to get a co-star, and then I want to get a guest star, and then I want to get a recurring, and then hopefully a series regular role, so you're kind of like trying to work your way up the acting ranks as you're going along as well.
Yeah. Do you think Firefly was your favorite cameo, or maybe even Hot in Cleveland? You got to actually be alongside Betty White. May she rest in peace.
Yeah. I mean, there was definitely more to do in Hot in Cleveland. I played a character who came back, so that was like a recurring role. And as far as guest stars go, that was an awesome job. Obviously, getting to work with Betty White was amazing. But Wendy Malick and Valerie Burton, Jane Leaves, like every time I came to set there was somebody from television history that was working as well. I met Regis Philbin on that set, Craig Ferguson, George Takei, and I'm like, Heather Locklear was on an episode I was in, Angela Kingsley from The Office. So it was like this revolving door, and you would just Dave Foley, who I was a huge fan of growing up from Kids in the Hall and News Radio. So every time I went, there was like a real like pedigree veteran television actor on the show. And it blew my mind, and I learned so much just from watching people work on that set.
That's good.
And not to mention like Sean, yeah, and Sean Hayes produced it with his his producing partner Todd Milliner. So like Sean Hayes would be around, and it's like Jack from Will and Grace is here, and so you're just like you were, and a lot of the TV writers were like veteran comedy writers from like Golden Girls, I think, and like Frasier. So you just had all these people. So you were surrounded by so much experience. And it was just awesome, to be part of that crew. It was like sitcom theater camp, or sitcom summer camp.
Just surrounded by all these legends. I hope you're just soaked up every second.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And a lot of people probably watching today also do remember you playing Steve in True Blood from 2008 to 2014. 38 episodes I looked on IMDb. What was your favorite part about being on that show? Because it is such a huge show. People are still watching it to this day thanks to things like Netflix.
Yeah. It's crazy. Yeah, it is kind of like, I think True Blood's hitting a moment where it's sort of coming back around. And I think the people who were kids when it was originally showing are now old enough to watch it. That was such a cool experience. I met so many amazing people on that show, incredibly talented people, made lifelong friends. And that's by far, Steve Newlin is by far my favorite character that I've ever gotten to play. It was a rare situation where I felt like it was a character that I immediately understood, immediately knew how to bring my sense of humor to it. And it was a cool experience of playing a character long term, where the longer I played it, the more my own personality informed where the character went and what the writers did with it. So, and it was just cool. I feel like he had a real arc, starting as this anti-vampire, minister, this pastor, reverend, and then to ultimately, if you haven't seen the show, I won't spoil, but ultimately where that character goes is a real arc. And so I got to play and continue to experience and dig deep into like what makes this sort of cartoonish guy tick, And it was just a wild show. There were times when you would get the script and you're like, okay, so in this episode, we're going to go hunt fairies. Okay, great. Like what other
totally normal.
And what other world, and fantasy at the time hadn't really taken off the way that it has now, in part thanks to True Blood and then Game of Thrones. So there wasn't a lot like it on TV to compare it to at the time. I remember at the time people were like, it's like Buffy, but with sex, But there wasn't all this other stuff in there yet. Weren't all these other cable and streamer shows that were doing similar stuff.
Well, it was sort of like, because around that time too, when I started watching it, I just finished Vampire Diaries, and it was such a big jump too, because it's like Vampire Diaries is good for, teenagers and the younger audience a little bit. There is still... No, you don't see the sex like you do in True Blood, and then it's a big adult. You're like, oh, this is the adult version of that. All right.
yeah, exactly. I mean, there were moments where I'm like, oh, okay, I think I'm just making softcore pornography, but and in some cases not. I didn't have to, but in some cases not softcore at all. It feels like, but like. You're like, I don't know. This is HBO. This is wild. This is, I guess, what we're doing here. But, it had the great acting and writing behind it. And I still haven't been on anything that's been quite the cultural phenomenon that show was. And it was weird to experience that because it was sort of like, I watched the show, but I didn't experience the show the way that everybody else who wasn't making it experienced it, So it's sort of like being on the inside of something that a lot of people are watching was very new to me and very wild. And I could see a real difference between that and other things that I'd worked on just by the amount of people who came up to me and was like, Steve Newlin, you're like, oh, wow, everyone is watching this show. It's crazy.
And you'll still get it for a while, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
it must be different for you when you rewatch it, though, because you already kind of know what's coming up.
Yeah, I actually haven't gone back. I've been tempted to because it's been a while, and Deborah Ann Wool and Kristen Bauer are doing a True Blood podcast where they're like going back and doing every episode of the series, and I think that would be a really fun way to rewatch it. And it's been long enough too that I've forgotten some stuff. Like I remember the big beats, but I know there's going to be things where that's the weird thing about being in this business. Yeah, I mean, if I went back and watched What I Like About You now, it would be so strange because there would be things that I'm like, I don't even remember doing this, but like I spent a week doing this episode and now I remember certain parts of it, but there would be so weird to go back. It'd be like watching a home movie and being like, oh, I don't remember this day happening, but
trying to remember your childhood.
Yeah.
Now, I have to bring this project up too because I love this movie. I've watched it several times and I loved your part in it. In 2010, you were in Beauty in the Briefcase with Hilary Duff.
This is one of those things that I had no idea would have as much reach as it did.
What was it like working with Hilary Duff? She's one that I've just grown up with.
Yeah, she was great. I really genuinely loved working with her. Just a really lovely person, very professional, very cool. Like I've been lucky that in most projects I've worked on, the cast is really bonded. And that's another one where we hung out. We filmed that in New Orleans and we would all hang out every night and go to dinner together. And it's really makes such a difference, especially when you have to work opposite someone that you didn't meet. I didn't meet her during the audition process. So it was really nice to get to set and be like, okay, cool. Especially since our characters ultimately have a romantic connection. It's so lovely when you're working with somebody, they're like, I really get along with this person. And that's another situation where another actor on that film, Kevin Kirkpatrick, who played my assistant in the show, we became fast friends and we're still we're friends still 12 years later. He's one of my best friends. So that movie for sure holds a very fond place in my heart. And it was just one of those things that I auditioned for and then I got, and I was like, okay. And then
and a big part.
And spent like 6 or 7 weeks in New Orleans. And anytime you get to travel and experience a new place, filming, that for me, that's one of the best parts of about this job, So that was a special moment, and it's one that I'm surprised. I mean, I guess I'm not, because Hillary has such a big following, but I didn't expect it to have the legs that it did, and people will still talk to me about it.
Oh, I'm glad I brought it up then.
yeah, no, it's nice. I like that,
And it's funny too, because when I watched that movie, obviously, it's a real chick flick. So ladies, if you haven't watched it, go check it out. Support Michael. But also, for us women, we always watch heaps of chick flicks and, romantic comedies, things like that. But something I loved about that movie, especially the ending, was so different, because a lot of those movies, obviously women have their checklist and go try to find that man, which she obviously did, but to have that whole, I don't want to ruin it in the end, but to switch it, I was just like, wow, I like that, What was your reaction when you first read the script in regards to that?
It's funny because you're like, you start off, you're like, oh, I'm supposed to be the square, what I mean?
No one wants to be with.
It's so funny where you're like, oh, nobody wants this guy. And then, where it leads, you're like, oh, okay, it's kind of cool. I kind of get a little bit of a redemption there. So I enjoy it. I like that. I think it was, and I think it was a positive message in terms of look, love might not be exactly how you predict it will be on paper. And I think it does kind of warn off how, for maybe some younger viewers of how hey, the person that you think is super attractive or think is the pick may not actually be someone good for you. So I did like that lesson ultimately gets, the character learns that lesson in the movie. But it was great. It was fun. And it was really fun to have been working on True Blood, where I'm playing a very creepy guy, to then go over here and do something that felt like was in that rom-com tradition. I appreciated that I got to express some of that range,
Was that lots of traveling? Was that New Orleans and LA, or is it all New Orleans?
It was all shot in New Orleans, so we were down there for 2 months. True Blood shot out here, although we would travel to New Orleans as well. But the stuff I did in New Orleans for True Blood happened later.
Oh, so, okay, yeah.
Been out there a couple times, I guess, now for work.
Well, Well, everyone go check that movie out if you haven't already. Entry,
Yeah.
of
Well,
course.
thank you for the recommendation. Yeah.
Yes. This is just the Lauren's recommendation segment of the show. And another cool thing under your belt is that you've actually contributed your voice to a number of video games, like SWAT 4, Fight Club, Men of Valor, is that how you pronounce it? And I've spoken to a lot of people about this type of work on the show, and I gotta say, like, because I want to talk to you about your experience with it too. I find it really funny when you hear about these people, they're talking about how they have to make these like funny noises just for the video games.
Lots of like,
yeah.
Oh, like it's really, and you're like pretending to like punch yourself, like and then they'll be like, give us a short one, give us a long one, give us a longer one.
It's like,
that was a situation. That was a situation where the first one was Men of Valor, and I booked that, and then it was the same company that kept bringing me back for other video games that they were doing, and then unfortunately, hopefully not because I was in them, but those games didn't sell well and that company folded, but I still got all the experience doing that. But that was cool. That was another situation where work begets work. And they're like, I didn't have to audition. I just started getting offers to come in because those guys really liked working with me.
And do you find it's a different type of acting as well? Because obviously when you're acting in front of the camera, you don't always have to be going, and
yeah, no, I mean, it's sort of like this microcosmic, thing, right? Where you got to zero in on these little tiny specific moments, and you might be repeating them over and over and over again in a booth, but you're still applying the same technique in terms of what's behind this, what's the, you're trying to find the honesty in every moment, right? So sometimes they want specific, like, no, we really want it like this or this length. So there is some it's a little bit technical and can be a little strange, but it's your job as an actor to put the thought behind that, put the motivation behind that, put sort of the honesty behind all of that. And that I really don't think is any different from when you're filming a scene or you're doing a scene on stage.
I guess you're just not really working off anything though.
Yeah, so it's just the way that it's the way that the performance is constructed is definitely different. And you are just becoming sort of part of, well, I guess filmmaking is also the same way. You're ultimately becoming part of a larger vision. But it's still your job as an actor, I think, to put that intention behind it, So I was using a lot of the same muscles, just in different ways, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think a lot of people are never going to play video games the same way again now. They'll just be like, oh, yes, that's what Michael was talking about.
Yeah. All those reactions and alt lines and,
Someone
and now, now like they're basically making movies with these because it's all mocap and everything else. So it's really, the video game world is definitely getting much closer to obviously the film world, film and TV world.
Oh, of course. We're having a lot more, as you said, motion capture stuff and animation, and it's all under the same umbrella anyway, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I would love to go back to talk about, you were talking about those comic books before and how that you're a writer. So you co-wrote a book for the lovely True Blood fans, if they're listening today, called True Blood, A Field Guide to Vampires. As well as a comic book miniseries called, is it Lucid? Did I pronounce that right?
Yeah, Lucid.
Yes. It looks really cool, and I'm going to read it after this. I didn't have time.
Oh, cool.
I was just like, I did
no worries.
put all the effort into the research, but it looked.
You've done all, yeah. There's 18 years of research that you don't have to put yourself through.
It's actually one of my favorite parts of doing this job.
Okay, good.
Because I love to come in and ask you questions. Hopefully, you haven't been asked before. So. What type of writing do you think takes the most time and the most energy out of you? Because you also have written for TV as well in short films.
Yeah, a little bit of TV, short films, and then a lot of stuff no one's ever seen because it's either not gotten made or it hasn't been made yet.
I'll read it for you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I don't know. It's different. So the question was, sorry, repeat the question for me, please.
What type of writing do you think takes the most time and takes the most energy out of you?
It differs. You know what I mean? For comic books, and for a while I was doing the True Blood ongoing comic book for IDW, and that's deadline based. You know what I mean? So you're like, I need to be turning in a script every few weeks. So I would say that took a lot of energy out of me, but wasn't super time consuming, because you'd be just moving from one issue to the next, and then you're like, all right, and it is time consuming. You're looking at the art coming in, and you're rereading stuff that you've written and catching mistakes, of which I always have so many. I really require a good copy editor. I wish someone could do that for my texting as well. I'm just like, type, send, type, send. And then it's like, who wrote this?
What was this supposed to be, Michael?
A drunk penguin typed this. It's indecipherable. But then, like, I'm working on a screenplay right now that I'm writing with a partner, and it's not taking a lot of energy, just because it's one of the things that we've kind of been working on in our spare time. But we started breaking story for this almost a year ago. So it is, in that sense, it's very time consuming, right? And we're just coming to the end of a draft that we feel is good enough to share with other people and get some feedback on. So by the time we're sending that out to a couple friends to read for us, I think about a year will have gone by since we sat down and had our first conversation about what this script would become.
Wow.
So it differs. Yeah. And if you're working on a deadline, then I think the more energy it takes out of you, and sort of left to your devices, if you're like me, unless you're really prolific, which I'm not, you might be spending, a year on a project. I have scripts that I've written that are 3 or 4 years old that I still kind of come back to and go, okay, what could I, is there anything I could do here to punch this up or maybe change this? So it just depends, I think.
And with Lucid as well, how did that all come about? Because have you just grown up with comic books? Because you did mention, about the comic books earlier in the interview as well.
Yeah, Lucid was one of those situations. Yeah. And Lucid was one where that actually came about because Zach Quinto, who I'm sure your listeners will know, he got his start on Heroes, played Spock in the new J.J. Abrams Star Trek, was Nosferatu. I went to college with Zach at Carnegie Mellon, and he was a senior actually when I was a freshman, and then a couple other Carnegie Mellon friends. Just want to let everybody know that I'm younger than him. No, but he and a couple of other friends from college, after Zach did the first Star Trek reboot, they put together a production company, and part of that entailed, in terms of like pitching TV and film projects, they also created a couple graphic novels and comics. And they asked me if I wanted to come in and pitch them some ideas, and Lucid was one of them. And it went through a process. It started as one thing and sort of became another thing. And we shopped it around, and then eventually took a meeting with Archaea, which is now part of Boom Studios. And that's how that project came about. Without Zach's help or Zach's name, I'm not sure that would have happened. So it was sort of like one of those nice opportunities about who in the business, and getting some ideas kind of pushed in front of others. And then, so I did that, and then that kind of led to doing the True Blood comics, and then co-writing the book with Gianna for the, Steve Newlin's Field Guide to Vampires. And then and then I did some stuff for DC, and I created a comic book called Adventure Van for Golden Apple when they launched a book line. And I've been kind of quiet in the comic book world for a little bit. Adventure Van was fairly recent, but I've sort of stepped back, and, I enjoy it, but I kind of hit a point where I was like, I'm sort of like, I got the podcast, I got the comics, I got the auditions, I was like, I need to I felt a little all over the place. And so I've sort of refocused, and just, instead of having 6 pots to stir it at all times, I'm trying to have like maybe 2 or 3 pots to stir,
A little bit more manageable. I find it funny that you like just casually drop. Yeah, something for DC too. What was that?
Well, I did a talent development workshop with them with a bunch of other really good writers who are really prominent comic book writers now and authors. Like, it was a thing where I'd taken meetings with DC when Lucid came out, and then I got brought in to do sort of this workshop that was taught by Scott Snyder, who was a big Batman writer. And it was sort of like taking a masterclass in comic book writing. And then that led to a few opportunities at DC where, I did like an issue of Nightwing and did a Superman short story. And then I pitched a bunch and was developing some other stuff that just ended up not going anywhere. And that's the other thing too about the writing world, is so much stuff kind of lingers in development for a long time. And so so that was great because that was the first time I got to like dig in and play with superheroes. And that was amazing. That was also like meeting childhood friends, or like childhood idols, getting to write like The Flash, Wally West, The Flash, who was like one of my favorite comic books growing up, was awesome, So I think I'm not done with comics, but I have consciously kind of taken a step back just to focus on a little bit of some other projects for the time being.
Just put on the back burner for now. We'll come back to it.
Yeah, why not? I don't know. Nothing, you never stop doing these things in this business. You know what I mean? Yeah. Nothing's ever, even with acting, there are times when I'm like, oh, it's been 9 months since my last job. What have I been doing this whole time?
Time goes quick.
It's weird. I think the thing about acting that's difficult is, you have really busy periods and then you have really slow periods. And it's one of the few jobs where, unless you are just, and I'm sure like for movie stars and big stars or people who are like the lead on, shows that have been going for 7 years, for me personally, more often than not, I'm on set way fewer days during the year than not, you know what I mean? So I have a lot of, I'm in this weird position where like I make a living at it and I don't need a day job, but I work at the level where like I have a lot of free time, which is a blessing and a curse, because I can't think of a lot of other jobs that people want to do and love to do. Like I love acting where I'm not on set as much as I'd like to be, and that I think is for a lot of working actors, I think that's the reality, where you're just like spending so much time trying to figure out, all right, how am I gonna get back on set,
Yeah.
It's tough. That can be the hard part of this, it's just being like, I'm sure you've spoken with other actors who are like, I don't know where my next job's coming from. And then suddenly one day it just happens. You're like, okay, cool.
It is
I
true.
guess I haven't lost it.
After every gig, you're like unemployed for a little bit, especially if you're really stressing about money to pay the bills and you have nothing else on the side. Yeah, it can be really stressful. But
it is
for you, it's
wild.
Great. Every day of your life is different, which you see you're passionate about. You're doing all things.
Yeah, thank you. And it's true. And I think that's one of those things that I have to, times when I get frustrated, I have to be like, hey, remember to be grateful. I have friends who do not like their day jobs and don't want to be doing them. So the fact that like, I really get to basically set my own schedule and be a freelancer and be self-employed is that in of itself, I think is a huge accomplishment that I have to like stop and remind myself, because you get I think you're so indoctrinated as a young actor about with these concepts of like what success is. And you have to, like it's being famous or it's being a movie star or it's winning an Oscar or winning an Emmy, these sort of the tokenism of what success in this business is, when most of the people that are working in this industry are working at a much, I don't want to say lower level, but are working at they're not in the spotlight as much. You know what I mean? And it is this constant grind that you have to do and keep yourself excited about, you know. And I think you have to like toss away some of those concepts of like, oh, success only looks like this, you know. I think a lot of people are like, and I feel this way. It's like, I don't know when I've made it. When have I made it? You know, you hear this concept of like making it. Well, what is that? Or do you know, is it being able to sustain a life doing the thing that you love? Isn't that enough? Or is it, no, it's when I'm holding an Oscar and I'm giving an acceptance speech. That's making it. You know, I think we have to sort of, as actors and artists, you have to sort of like check yourself and go, okay, what's the real goal here? You know?
That's very true. I think just being your own boss and making your own schedule, that to me is success.
Yeah.
I love that fact too. I'm like, whoa, I can do an interview here. I can have some time off, you know, it's a great lifestyle.
Yes. But I think you're always chasing that bigger thing, right? You know what I mean? Yeah, but this is just temporary. It's going to be like, I'll really be happy when I'm doing this. You know what I mean? Because we all have goals professionally, no matter what we're doing, where we're like, all right, this is cool, but I want to get out of this room and I want to get to the next floor. You know what I mean?
Goals are good, but you also want to be happy where you are right now.
Exactly. Yeah. And accept that, like, hey, success looks different for everybody. And whatever you're doing, especially in Hollywood, is never permanent. None of it's permanent. True Blood, not a permanent job, right? Beating the Briefcase, not a permanent job. So you also learn that for anyone involved in that show. So you have to learn, like, this is awesome. Enjoy this right now because it will end. You know what I mean? So get as much out of it as you can right now.
Bit of a reality check.
Yeah, but I think it's an important one because that's just the way the nature of the business. You know what I mean? You are like, one day the Simpsons will end, believe it or not. You know what I mean?
How long's that been going now?
I know, but no job in this industry is permanent. You know, you may have 10 great years playing a really cool, a dream role, but those all eventually come to an end because it's the nature of stories. Stories have a beginning and a middle and an end, and then you're off, you know, off to something else exciting.
You know, whether you're an actor or not, life has its different stages, you know.
Yes, exactly.
Jobs keep coming and going too in normal life, and, you know, sometimes relationships end. So it's just it's life, isn't it?
It is, and I think,
but you know what I mean.
No, but I don't think it is depressing. I think that's the beautiful thing, and I think that's. Change is good and change is natural. You know what I mean? Sometimes some change sucks, but change is natural and nothing is supposed to stay the same. And I actually think there's a direct correlation as a metaphor there for living the actor's life and realizing that as a teachable metaphor for life in general, like you just explained, you know, and I think that's good. It's good to become aware of like the natural shifting state of things, you know?
Absolutely. I love talking to you. It's been such a pleasure. I'm just like, oh my God,
thanks.
I can't believe we've been speaking for an hour and I haven't even talked
this
about
man
your
keeps rambling on.
I know. I'm like, geez, I better get to the podcast stuff. I hope you're not in a rush. Can we keep chatting? Is that all good? All right.
Yeah, this is why all my podcast episodes run over an hour because I just keep talking.
No, I love it. That's so much better than some, you know, guests that you're just like, oh my God, I gotta pull teeth, you know?
Right. Yes, I've been there.
So let's talk about your podcast side of your life because you are still doing a very successful paranormal podcast with your pal.
Thank you.
Who played Detective Wilden on Pretty Little Liars.
Yes, Mr. Bryce Johnson.
Called you mentioned it before, the Bigfoot Collectors Club. Go check it out if you haven't already, guys. How did this all come about? How did you two originally meet? I don't even think I asked Bryce that originally.
Well,
and have you experienced any paranormal activity yourself?
Oh gosh, well I'm gonna need a couple more hours for that one. But, yeah, Bryce, listen to the very first episode of Bigfoot Collectors Club to answer that question. Quick answer is like yes, I've seen some weird stuff. Saw a ghost in Interlochen, for example, in a theater. Wow. Definitely saw it. A friend of mine saw it as well. I tell that story on the podcast. Bryce actually, he
forget out now.
Bryce told this story, but he always forgets a crucial part because he didn't remember me. But when I was on What I Like About You, I wrote an episode of the show and he was a guest star on that episode. So I was in the room when we cast him and I always remembered him after that episode, and he'd pop up on TV like you talked about in your interview with him. And I'd be like, oh, that's Bryce. I remember this guy. I love this guy. And he popped up on in Willow Creek, which is a Bigfoot found footage horror film directed by Bobcat Goldthwait. It's great, really well done, low budget found footage horror movie. It's better than the Blair Witch Project. And Bryce does a really great job in it. And it's so funny because I watched that, and a week later, I was on set in a guest star for a show called Major Crimes that was on TNT out here at the time. And lo and behold, Bryce was guesting on the show as well. And we worked a lot together that week. And I was like, I reintroduced myself. He didn't remember me from What I Like About You. That's fine. I was a writer of the show. It's not like I was there the whole week. And then I was like, I just watched Willow Creek. You were so great in that. He's like, oh, no way, man. And I was like, yeah. And I was like, I'm really into that Bigfoot stuff. Are you into that stuff? He's like, oh, dude, you have no idea. When Bobcat cast me in this, I was like, you got the right guy, man. And so we just would sit in our cast chairs and tell, paranormal stories. And that led to a friendship. And every 6 months, Bryce and I would get together, go out to lunch, and we would spend maybe 10, 15 minutes talking shop. And then we'd always end up talking about some paranormal thing. And I'd been wanting to do a podcast for a while. And it hit me one day. I was like, oh, well, Bryce and I should just do a paranormal show together. And, I don't think he'd really considered doing podcasts before, but I quickly got him around to that idea. And then almost immediately, we found our on-mic producer, Riley Bray, who's also a brilliant musician. And he's now really become the third host of the show. And we've been, we're in our 5th year doing it,
Yeah, I had to look it up. I was like, are they still doing it?
Yeah, we haven't stopped. We took a little break last fall for a couple months just to catch a breather after 4 years. But we also have a Patreon, BCC The Other Side. So we're like dropping additional content over there. So it's been great. It's been fun. And I think the thing that I really enjoy about doing a podcast is, even though we're on a network, Campfire Media, like we started doing it on our own. And it's one of the few things I know you can relate to this.
Yes.
Where the only thing that's stopping you from putting a podcast out there is like, getting a good microphone or something, because you can just record it on your laptop and put it up on Podbean or Anchor or wherever, and it's out there, And it was one of those things where like I didn't really know what I was doing at the time, other than what I knew I wanted the show to be. And I just kind of learned as I went, like, oh, I should have done this earlier on or that earlier on. You kind of learn to produce as you go, as I know. And so I also decided after 4 years of doing that, I was like, I want to make another one. And I kind of want to take everything that I learned doing Bigfoot Collectors Club and apply it to a new show that I'm doing called Slate Your Name, where it's very similar to this situation, where it is me talking to other actors about the ups and downs of the entertainment industry, and with a lot of emphasis on early jobs, getting your start. I even go through their IMDb and pick some early roles and like, okay, this character, Samantha, where did you play this?
Yes.
And then get some of those stories behind. Yeah, some of those stories behind their early roles. So if you're a fan of Rave It Up, you'll probably like Slate Your Name.
Yes,
because it's it's very inside baseball for Hollywood. Yeah, it's fun. So
hey, if you need this interview and have a whole episode about you, go right ahead.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, and that I just launched like a month ago, so it's real easy to catch up right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so it's great.
Love the idea of the whole podcast, on your email with with my talent producer, I was just like, I was rereading it over it, and I was like, yes, I love this idea for this show, because I was like, that is so similar to Rave It Up and what we're all about.
Yeah.
Finding out how you got to where you are today, because it's something a lot of people don't ask, you know. Once you've we were talking about the whole made it thing, people just like, oh yeah, it just magically happened. It happened overnight. It doesn't.
No.
Any overnight successes, it's like 10 years behind it.
Oh yeah, I have a friend, Sean Hayter, who just won an Academy Award for Coda, who she adapted and directed Coda, and which is an amazing movie. And Sean was in one of my very first movies, Dorian Blues, and she'd also gone to Carnegie. She was in Zach's class, and I didn't know her very well at college, but then we worked together on this film, and I remember, you know, her starting to get into filmmaking and going to the AFI women's program and writing her first scripts. And, you know, this was 18 years ago, you know what I mean? And here she is winning an Academy Award. And some people who may have not seen her first film, Mother, may not know, you know, or might just think, oh, this just happened overnight for her. She's been putting in the work for so long, and it was so cool to see her win this year. It was just incredible, you know. And it's inspiring to me. It's like, all right, look, Sean has just been putting in the work and doing good work and being passionate about it, and you know, it does take talent, and she's got it, but it was so inspiring. Yeah, it's like, you got, look, hard work really does pay off. You know, Absolutely. It's so exciting to see people that you root for, you know, make it, but, you know, make that kind of achievement, and just watch them be rewarded, or, you know, for their hard work is so cool.
Well, I have one last question about the podcast as well, because
sorry, I went off on a tangent there.
No, that's all right. You obviously do Slate Your Name by yourself, and Bigfoot Collectors Club you do with Bryce, and you got a whole team behind that as well. Do you find it's easier to do it by yourself? Because you've been doing Bigfoot Collectors Club for a while with someone else. Do you guys ever butt heads on where you want the podcast to go in the future? New ideas?
No, not really. I mean, I think it's always a discussion with the guys on Bigfoot of like, okay, what are we going to do this summer? Are we going to do another wet, hot alien summer where we only talk about UFOs, or are we going to do something else? And it is difficult at times, especially now, like during COVID, being in lockdown, it was like, when we had so much time to kill, it was, you know, I think we did some of our best work on the podcast. And one end, it sucked because we weren't all together in the studio the way we had been, and we were doing it online like this, even if we were in the same town. But I also think like it opened up a lot of creative space to get creative and try new things with the show. And now that we're kind of back, Riley's got a new job. He's working. Bryce has been filming stuff. I've been doing stuff. So getting everyone together, getting the three of us together on the same night, and then usually a fourth in the form of a guest. The scheduling has become very difficult, and that's such a boring answer to that question.
No, it's true.
Yeah, but that's easier when it's just me and one other person for Slate Your Name. And there is a producer, a silent producer on the show. He's not on mic, Ryan Count's house, but I can record it without him if I need to. He just, you know, he can just edit if that's what I need him to do. So it's different. It's also an opportunity, I think, to like, because when you are doing a group show, there's your voice, but it's always going to balance out with Riley's voice and what Bryce brings to the table and all of that. So Bigfoot, even though I had a singular vision for what I wanted it to be at the beginning, it's very close to that, but it's become its own thing. So with Slate Your Name, I feel like I have a little bit more of a creative control to be like, okay, this is my voice and this is what I want to do with the show. And it's a little bit more edited. It's, you know, I try to make it a little bit tighter. It's a little shorter. And these are all things that, again, that I'm taking from learning from Bigfoot and applying it to a new show. It's like, all right, if I could even be more precise and a little bit more direct and a little more focused with a podcast, which I think all the things that those things don't make Bigfoot Collectors Club good. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's sort of when the show goes off the rails that I think are some of our best episodes. But yeah, so just it's fun to go, okay, being sort of the sole author of this show, what is it? What's my voice in that, Well,
you do
in some ways feels more personal too. Thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah. Thank you.
Everyone go check it out, both of them. Whether you're into paranormal activity or not, Bigfoot Collectors Club is still a great show, right? So
thanks. That's the idea. I mean, I think like you don't have to be into this stuff. It's to get in, to enjoy the show. You know what I mean?
Come in open-minded, learn something.
It might be better if you don't, because you're like, what weird story are they telling? What is this? And then you'll get like, we'll interview actors and comedians and writers about their own weird experiences that they can't explain. So yeah, I think it's
sorry.
No, I was just saying, I think it's very accessible.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been trying to get my dad into it too, because he's really into the paranormal stuff. He like watches all
right
the
on.
show. Yeah, he'll always tape on it on his TV and want to watch all the different, paranormal shows out there. And I'm just like,
yeah,
you're gonna love this show. Go listen to it.
He's like, I'm not a podcast guy. Is he just not into podcasts?
I think because he's just like, I just got to find time,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
When you're in the garden, just chuck your headphones in,
That's what I do.
Yeah. Exactly. So,
well, thanks. I appreciate you trying to fight, get me one more audience member. I appreciate
that. You're welcome. Well, he listens to me, so I'm like, come on, you can expand it as well if you want.
Yeah. Branch out a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. Well, hopefully after listening to this one, he might want to go check it out now.
There you go.
But good luck with the rest of, however long you're going to do the show. Good luck with the future episodes.
Right? There's no end in sight right now.
I know. Is there anything else you're working on that you'd love to tell us about? Stuff we can look forward to in the future?
Stuff I've got, stuff that I probably can't say. I'm going to be on another cool show, at least briefly, at least for like one episode that'll be probably, I think, this summer.
Cool.
So follow me on Instagram at McMills and I'll announce stuff. Then I'm going to go shoot a really fun movie, indie comedy called, well, maybe I'm not even allowed to say that, but I'm about to go shoot something that I'm about to go shoot something in May that I'm really excited about. And I think it's a really fun character. So follow me at McMills, 2 Z's, and I'll keep you guys updated about all that stuff.
It's good to see some more honestly coming up.
Thanks. Yeah. But in the meantime, listen to Bigfoot Collectors Club and Slate Your Name. I put my heart and soul in those shows, and I really love interaction with listeners and stuff like that. So I appreciate you guys checking it out, and they're free. You can listen to them for free.
Exactly.
On your favorite podcast app.
But if you want to further support them, go to Patreon.
Yes. Yeah, we have Patreons for both, but just come listen to the main show, and if you're into it, then we can discuss. But
then we can discuss. I like that.
Yeah.
Well, everyone go follow him on Instagram, and even though you couldn't mention those projects today, it just means you're going to have to come back on, Michael, tell us all about it when it's time.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yay! Well, I know I've taken up enough of your time. I was like, I wanted to play a game as well. No, maybe next time. We'll play a game next time. And you can set the bar nice and high for Bryce, because it's a good competitive game.
Maybe you can have us both on and we'll play a game. Bryce and I can play the game.
Oh my God, yes, that would be amazing. Yes, I would love that. But as you said, it's sort of about figuring out the timing. Figuring out when you're both free. Maybe after your next, gig in May. So...
Okay, sounds good.
I did want to finish up with our very famous question here on Rave It Up. A bit of a closing statement. You kind of already know what's coming, don't you? But, knowing what you know now, Michael, what would you tell your 14-year-old self?
I would say I'd probably echo some of the stuff that I said earlier about nothing's permanent. No job is permanent. No moment in life is permanent. So when things get hard, keep that in mind. And when things are good, keep that in mind as well, and make sure that you enjoy that moment. And I would just tell him, keep doing what you're doing. Maybe, don't slack, keep working hard, and just keep the faith and keep doing it. And, you're going to like where you end up. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
I think I've thought about that a couple times. Like if 15-year-old me saw what I'm doing now, I can tell he'd be like, wait, what? You're not, this hasn't happened yet, but they'd still be like, oh, this is pretty cool. So you're doing it. Right. So yeah, just be like, just enjoy it and live in the moment as much as possible.
I love that answer. Thank you. We put the answers to a lot of those questions in the book behind me. Was it not last year, the year before? Oh my goodness, time's flying by.
I know. Right? Well, I feel like the last 2 years count as 1 year anyway. So
exactly,
it's fine.
It just doesn't count. We didn't grow 2 years older because it just didn't happen.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today, Michael. I really appreciate your time. It's been so much fun.
Yes, I had a great time. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And come back on the show anytime, all right? If you want to chat about anything or promote
you say that, but you might regret if I'm on every episode of your show, just taking up all the spotlight.
I don't know about the audience. I hope they do.
Yeah, I don't know. The audience may not. They'll be like, this is it. It was fine. He was here once, but, she said come back anytime, and he really took her seriously on that. That's very weird.
No, you've given some really good answers. I think you helped a lot of people today that are listening and might want to get into acting or writing comic books or any of the amazing things you do. There's heaps.
Well, and I will say this, not to go back and now actually plug the Slate Your Name Patreon, but on the Green Room, which is the Patreon to Slate Your Name, I take questions directly and there's a lot of advice doled out there. So if that's your thing, then consider, joining the Patreon for $5 a month. And, I'm giving you my honest career advice. So yeah, definitely.
Yes, he's definitely very honest. And hopefully in the future, I know traveling's a bit starting to kind of pick up again, but if you ever come to Australia, let me know, okay?
You'll be the first person I call.
Yes, good. We can do a face-to-face interview in person.
Great. I would love that. Yeah, that would be awesome.
But yeah, let's keep in contact. It's been so much fun. We'll get Bryce on next time. Sounds good.
Yeah, I think so too. That's good.
Yeah. Well, I hope you all enjoyed today's interview. If you like check out any of our other interviews, please visit our website, raveituptv.com. Also, our interview with Bryce Johnson is also up there too. And while you're there, please go check out our book, Knowing What I Know Now. And also I have a mini ebook up there called Staying Strong, Finding Inner Peace During Hard Times. And also, we mentioned Patreon in this interview with Michael. He's got his own Patreon for both the podcasts, and we also have one too. So if you'd like to further support Rave It Up, please check out patreon.com/Rave It Up. You can get a lot of behind-the-scenes content and bonus stuff. So please go check it out and spread the word. But for now, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye!